Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed lunch. And I'm Zhejiang Shim, the moderator for the upcoming two presentations. And my short-term memory isn't functioning very well, so I wrote down something about our first speaker. And our first speaker is Chenchen Julio Song. And he did his PhD at the University of Cambridge and is currently working as a 100 Talents Program researcher at Zhejiang University in China. And the title of today's presentation is Form Sequence and the Strong Minimalist Thesis. Join me in welcoming the speaker, Chenchen Song.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction, and also thanks to you all, both our online and our offline participants, for joining me here today right after lunch. I hope my talk won't be too boring. Okay, so as you can see, the title of my talk is Form Sequence and the Strong Minimalist Thesis toward the middle ground conception. And if you wish to download my slides anytime during the talk, I have put QR codes on each of every slide, so feel free to download, scan, download them whenever you have need. And since I'm talking about form sequence, I would like to first, it doesn't move. Why doesn't it move? Oh, now it moves. I would like to first give a brief introduction to the very short history of this new operation that was initially proposed in Chomsky 2019 and then officially named in Chomsky 2020. And then it was further discussed and extended a little bit in Chomsky 2021B, the famous GK paper. But eventually it got abandoned in a footnote in Chomsky 2023, the MC, the Miracle Creed paper. The reason for its abandonment in Chomsky's work is that the FSQ, or the form sequence rule, goes against the Strong Minimalist Thesis, or the SMT. But then again, Chomsky's view on this has kept changing in the past 5 years or so. So for instance, in the 2020 paper at the Linguistics Society of Japan, his view was that this form sequence rule was an unavoidable departure from the SMT. And then when we got to the GK paper, he further elaborated a bit that this was not a departure at all. If it could be viewed, if it could be regarded as a third factor tool. So his view has kind of kept changing on this. And in my own recent work, I have tentatively tried to show that this form sequence rule is indeed anti-SMT in Chomsky's original formulation. But the idea behind the operation can actually have alternative formulations that are not anti-SMT, okay? Not in a strong way at least. So that's the theme of my talk today. And more specifically, I plan to do three things in this talk. First, I will quickly review the form sequence, or FSQ rule, as described in Chomsky's original work. And then I want to introduce my own alternative formulation in this recent paper of mine. And lastly, I would like to demonstrate how the reformulated and generalized form sequence rule can be put to use by concrete linguistic examples. I wish to deliver two takeaway messages. The first message is that the form sequence rule is worth saving, despite what Chomsky says in the Miracle Creed paper, because the sequence is such a basic type of structure in human language and cognition. We must somehow deal with this kind of structure. We can't just keep postponing it or leaving it aside. And then the second takeaway message from my talk is that the reformulated and generalized form sequence rule can actually be a useful tool for us working in syntactician problems. So I will begin with Chomsky's original formulation. The first public lecture where Chomsky had introduced this new sequence generating operation was the famous UCLA lecture, where it wasn't actually named form sequence yet, but just presented as an extension of pair merge. So here's a quick reminder of what pair merge is. We'll have two syntactic objects, alpha and beta, and then we just form an ordered pair of them. And then to derive unbounded unstructured coordination, like the examples in 1, Chomsky in 2019 proposed the new structure, the new notation in 2, where we can see, as we can see, each conjunct SI is paired up with a link element LI, and all such pairs SL are put in a sequence. And the first slot of the sequence is occupied by a potentially abstract conjunction. Importantly for Chomsky, in his original conception, all the links in the sequence are assumed to be identical. And he simply took the link element to be the little n or the little b, again, in the original conception. And then we should also remember that Chomsky has been likening pair merge the higher dimensional structure building, as Victor mentioned this morning. And this has been the case since the early noughties. And then this higher dimensional view, this higher dimensional thinking has been inherited in the form sequence rule as well. Since this quote has been mentioned by Victor, I won't repeat it here. Okay. And then when we reached 2020, this is the place where the rule, the sequence generation rule, was officially named. But it was only verbally named form sequence. But in the literature, there seems to be some variation in terms of how the term is actually spelled. It changes from author to author. And in this talk, I'm simply using this space to spell form sequence. Okay, so there seems, in general, to be some sort of uncertainty at the time, at this moment, in our community as to how to write, not just form sequence, but also other terms like this, in the beginning with a form. Okay, and also, I have a feeling that it is generally unclear at this point in history as to what extent the typographical features like capitalization, small capital spacing, these features are meant to be lexicalized in current linguistic terminology or nomenclature. But in this talk, I will simply use the form sequence as spaced. So. And then the formulation given in Chomsky 2020 is actually in a different guise from that notation from Chomsky 2019. And if we compare the two notations in 3, we can see clearly that there are at least 2 differences. The first one is probably just a free typographical variation. It has to do with how the conjunction is written. Well, this is not that crucial. But the more substantive difference is this one. So in Chomsky 2019, we had the explicit linking elements, whereas in Chomsky 2020, those elements are left out. And what we have is implicit matching between the conjunct items instead. But despite that different look, that different appearance, the gist between the two formulations remain the same. That is, a family of conjunct items that meet certain sameness conditions, okay, are directly put in a sequence like this. And here's another quite noticeable, though perhaps non-real difference between Chomsky 2019 and Chomsky 2020 and 2021, okay, which has to do with how exactly the sequence, the form sequence, is fixed or chosen. So in Chomsky 2019, the sequence in question was fixed via the Hilbert's epsilon operator, but the issue is not really touched on at all in Chomsky's later talks and publications. Here's a little bit of background on Hilbert's epsilon operator. So this epsilon operator, or epsilon symbol, was proposed in Hilbert and Bernay's 1939. It's quite old tool from the foundations of mathematics as a formal tool to create a term out of the formula. So here in 4, we have a typical epsilon term, which denotes identity x, such that f is true for x. So for instance, if f is apple, then this epsilon term simply denotes an apple. But we need to bear in mind that the choice here is indeterminate. So there's no way for us to know which apple is chosen. It's just an arbitrary fixed apple out of the world. And here is the long quote where Hilbert's epsilon operator was actually mentioned in Chomsky's 2019 formulation of form sequence. So he says, in order to generate these objects, we generate a set, which is a finite set, and then we pick out of the set a sequence, and it could be any sequence of elements, and there's in fact infinitely many possible sequences. So we pick one out of those, and the operation of picking a particular element out of the set of sequences is just David Hilbert's epsilon operator. Okay? And in this long quote, Chomsky also mentions that the epsilon operator is indeterminate, as in David Hilbert's original mathematical definition. However, as I will show in a bit, things are a little bit different between mathematics and linguistics. And when we borrow the epsilon tool from mathematics into linguistics, it seems that there's no real indeterminate choices in linguistics or in cognitive sciences in general. So what I'm highlighting here is that in linguistics, form sequence included, the epsilon choice is at most semi-indeterminate. There's always something guiding the choice in the background. And here's a quick word of generality. What I want to highlight here is that this sequence choosing scenario described in this long quote by Chomsky is actually much, much more general than just the motivating case of coordination. But what we have is this scenario. So each sequence has an underlying set, okay, that's the fact. And then the generation of any sequence in any domain, linguistic or not, can be reduced to the same formal method. And that method is consistently definable by the epsilon operator. So here we get a set of ingredients of whatever type in whichever domain. And then we form a set of possible sequences out of those ingredients. And finally, we pick one by the epsilon choice, the epsilon operator. So that's a super general third factor-ish choice operation. Right. Now let's compare Chomsky's several descriptions of form sequence again from 2019 to 2021. Okay. We have already seen the first two. So in the first one, in the Chomsky 2019 formulation, we still have the explicit linking elements, and then in 2020, those are gone. What we have is matching condition instead, right? And then in 2021, the initial set of ingredients is formally explicitly formed by form set. So this is the initial set of ingredients, and based on that, we move on to the form sequence. But what is interesting here, and also what's puzzling here, is that Chomsky seems to have never clarified exactly how this merge conjunction and form sequence rule, how this step works in more exact detail. So we know that conjunction needs to join the derivation in some way at some time, but we don't really know when or how. Okay. I will come back to this point later. Given the name of form sequence, well, which basically literally says form a sequence, we can probably say that the only place where the form sequence, its inner workings, are actually defined is actually just Chomsky 2019, albeit in very casual terms. And then in Chomsky 2020 and 2021, form sequence is still invoked, but it's just invoked. It's not really defined in an internally oriented way. Okay? So in this quote, from this quote 2021, we see what input a form sequence is, we see what its output is, but we don't really know how the input is converted into the output. Right? So that's why I say here the epsilon-based casual definition in Chomsky 2019 is actually the only and also most informative peek into this black box, or this white box here, given by Chomsky, in his public lectures at least. Right. So if we combine Chomsky 2019 and Chomsky 2020 and 2021, we can more or less specify, we can try to pin down the following steps in 6 for the inner workings of form sequence. Okay? And let's take, for the sake of demonstration, let's take the quoted phrase young, tall, and happy, for example. So first we form a set of conjunct ingredients, young, tall, happy, and then we form a set of possible sequences from those ingredients. And next, we choose a particular sequence out of that very large set. And finally, this is the final output with everything properly linearized with the conjunction being filled in. What we need to pay attention to here is that the process from 6A to 6C is definitely and clearly beyond the power of merge, which is why the form sequence rule has been said very correctly to be a departure from the Strong Minimalist Thesis. And since I've been talking about the Strong Minimalist Thesis all this time, I think I do need to give you a quick reminder of what this thing is. What is the SMT? Okay? So here's some very recent formulations, some very recent words from Chomsky's recent work. In Chomsky 2020, he says that SMT holds that I language, the system that generates thought, keeps to merge and language independent principles, such as computational efficiency. And then in Chomsky et al. 2023, they further added that the innate system should be reduced to a minimum, and appeal to the third factor should be concomitantly maximized. So that's some general background on the definition of Strong Minimalist Thesis. But then, against that background, you can clearly see that the form sequence rule, as I mentioned just now, in Chomsky's original formulation is indeed anti-SMT, as it cannot be reduced to merge. But then Chomsky 2021 further remarked that form sequence may not be a departure at all if it can be regarded as part of the third factor toolkit. Well, that sounds like a pretty promising way to do this thing. It sounds like a very promising direction to explore at least. However, we also need to bear in mind that form sequence cannot be entirely reduced to the third factor toolkit, because it still serves to manipulate syntactic objects and build structures after all. And we know only bona fide syntactic operations can do such things. Okay. So we're kind of in the dilemma here. After introducing Chomsky's original descriptions of form sequence, next I move on to introduce my own alternative, an SMT conformal reformulation. So here's my general idea. The general idea is this one. We still want the sequence generating operation like form sequence at our disposal, but we do not want the sequence to be entirely generated in narrow syntax. Instead, we just let narrow syntax somehow pave the way for the eventual, for the ultimate generation of such a structure, for instance, at the interface that is after narrow syntax. And then in my reformulation, I have implemented the syntactic part of form sequence of this conceived form sequence rule as multidimensional pair merge, again based on just the initial description in Chomsky 2019. Here, I think it's time that we recall that in Chomsky 2019, that each conjunct item is a joint from a different dimension. And in his original wording, despite, I'll check Victor's words, this is also the same point. So let's call this point the pivot of coordination for the sake of our discussion here. And this pivot is what structurally holds the multiple conjunct items together. So what do we know about this pivot of coordination? Well, first we know that since the pivot structurally holds the conjunct items together, it must lie at the intersection of all the dimensions involved in the coordination. And second, since there can be an unbounded number of conjuncts, the pivot must have flexible area. That means it can accept any number of arguments. So considering these 2 points, it seems that the obvious candidate for the pivot is just a potentially abstract conjunction or a co or ampersand for conj. But what about the link elements? Let's also remember, since we're talking about Chomsky 2019, let's also remember that in 2019 he was talking about explicit link elements. Well, we can take the link elements to be an interface, to reflect an interface condition on well form this, perhaps just as part of Chomsky's later on matching conditions. So from Chomsky 2020 on, he stopped talking about explicit linking, but switched to implicit matching. But as I will show immediately next, even though the linking elements could be considered part of the matching condition, the 2 notions are still different. They're not the same notion. And that is because the matching conditions are a broader notion. Okay? According to Chomsky 2021, the broader notion of matching condition could be syntactic, it could be semantic, and it could even be pragmatic. So if we observe these 2 sentences here, both conjunct pairs in the 7, like in an ambulance and a comma, and an ambulance and a comma, they both match in syntactic categories. But the difference in acceptability, they can only be reduced to semantic or pragmatic mismatches according to Chomsky 2021. But on the other hand, if we observe this notation of form sequence from Chomsky 2019, then the link elements, especially on Chomsky's original little n or little b conception, they are clearly and unambiguously formal syntactic elements in nature. So that is why I'm saying that, I'm trying to say that we can take the link elements to be the syntactic part of the matching conditions, but we cannot really totally equate these 2 notions because one is considerably broader than the other. And specifically, we may think of this notation from Chomsky 2019 not as a syntactic object, but as a high-level declaration. So we're changing our perspective here. The notation stays the same, but we're switching our perspective. And that means this notation just declares what form sequence is. It declares that a link element can be identified for each conjunct. Okay? And formally, this declaration simply amounts to defining a function like this that assigns to each conjunct term S one of its subterms L. Okay? And this function is set top. And when we expand it in set theoretic terms, it's exactly a set of pairs like this. So it seems to show us that the angle bracket notation is kind of overloaded in current minimalism. When we see a pair of angle brackets like this, we tend to think this is the product of pair merge, but it's not always the case. And on this view, the pairs SL are not products of the pair merge, but just a meta-theoretical notation on our switched perspective. And also on that note, this alternative notation, where we're refraining ourselves from using the angle brackets, this one might be a little bit less ambiguous. Okay? And now let's turn to really derive the multidimensional objects, okay, in coordination. So we let each conjunct item, like S superscript L, pair merge with the pivot, which I'm using code to denote. We'll pair merge each and every one of them with code from a separate dimension. And then we obtain the following syntactic object. And we should bear in mind that there's no C-command relation between these conjuncts because they are, well, at different dimensions. And then the pivot code, the pivot conjunction, is the thing that holds the multidimensional structures together. But from a formal perspective, from a formal mathematical perspective, this structure is just, well, it's a whole set or a partially ordered set where one element is ranked against all other elements, and the other elements are all incomparable with regard to each other. And this can be pictorially represented with this Hasse diagram, as we can see here. And then this notation in 10 and this notation in 11 are simply two ways to describe this picture here. So we could either describe this picture as merging, pair merging each x with co, or we could say that we're, in a sense, at some higher level of abstraction, pair merging the whole set of conjuncts with co. So at a certain level of abstraction, they are essentially describing the same scenario in order theory. And incidentally, this order theoretic interpretation of multidimensional pair merge also helps us solve a mystery, a long-term mystery in Chomsky's formulation of the form sequence, and that has to do with how the ampersand, how the conjunction is merged into the structure. Okay, and now we can tentatively flesh out the merging of end and form sequence process as follows. So first we apply form set, and then we apply pair merge, a multidimensional pair merge to the output of form set. Okay. And then we apply form sequence to the output of pair merge. And finally, we externalize the thing, we pronounce the thing. Okay. There's two important points that I want to highlight here. The first is that among these four steps, only 12b, only the pair merge step happens in narrow syntax. Okay. All the other steps are somewhere else. Okay. They're next to narrow syntax, but they're not in narrow syntax per se. Okay. And the second point here is that multidimensional structures, like those in 12b, since they don't really involve any C-command relation, there's no C-command-based linearization algorithm that can be applied to them. So if we do want to linearize or externalize such unstructured cases at all, then we do need some sort of non-C-command-based algorithm like the form sequence rule. Okay? Another interesting point here is that in 12c, in this form sequence step, each x, each conjunct, is still connected to the ampersand, to the conjunction. So if we observe, go back to the picture here, what we're sequencing are not simply the conjunct items themselves, we're actually sequencing the whole dimensions here. So we're not just sequencing the dots, we're sequencing the lines like this. And that's why I'm distributing the end to each and every of them to show that each x is still connected to end. So in sum, on this middle ground conception, the narrow syntactic part of form sequence is just repeated pair merge. It doesn't use the sequence at all as output of the syntax, but it uses a poset that can be subsequently converted into a sequence. And in this way, we're also keeping syntactic structure, narrow syntactic structure, in a purely hierarchical fashion. Okay? But this furthermore means that this reformulated form sequence rule in its entirety must happen in a computational environment that is larger than narrow syntax. And here I'm representing this larger computational environment with this blue equation here, where P stands for a pre-derivation of preparatory stage, where things like lexical subarrays, lexical arrays, and workspace are, well, I don't want to say forward, but at least they're prepared. Okay? And then I simply stands for interfaces, PDF, LF, including the discourse, which is probably attached to LF. And now we can conveniently call, again for the sake of discussion, we can call this larger environment minus NS, so E minus NS. We can call this remnant the computational context. But this equation is not yet complete. And why? That is because the epsilon choice involved in form sequence is not necessarily indeterminate. I mentioned this a couple minutes ago. So if we consider the sentences examples in 13, then none of the sequences here is really arbitrarily chosen. They are all guided by some sort of background information. So for instance, the two sequences in 13 are chosen based on discourse information, right? And then the sequence of fruit in 13b is chosen, is determined by the speaker's knowledge about their likes and dislikes. And then this list of rainbow colors in 13c is determined by the speaker's general world knowledge. And importantly, both types of knowledge, both knowledge about the speaker themselves and knowledge about the general world, these two types of knowledge are stored somehow in the speaker's memory, which should thus be considered part of the larger computational context, even though it is detached from their syntax. So here's a quick interim summary. On the middle ground conception we have just seen, form sequence is reformulated as a hybrid operation with a syntactic and post-syntactic part. And the syntactic part of form sequence is just repeated pair merge, which is SMT conforming. And then the post-syntactic part heavily relies on the epsilon, the third factor strategy of epsilon choice, which is just the general choice function. And also, it is pretty evident that such a sequence-generated operation is more useful at PF because PF is all about sequences. That doesn't mean that this generalized form sequence is only a PF-specific rule because it could potentially be used for LF too, okay, and elsewhere too. For instance, if we take a look at this sentence, I went to the post office, the market, and bookstore in reverse order, then essentially two different sequences are needed or chosen at PF and LF. Okay? And this further confirms the point that a sequence output cannot really be generated in every syntax. So I only have limited time, but I have prepared 3 examples. So I think I can illustrate one of them properly. So I will begin with the example of adjective ordering from Larson's recent work. The issue of adjective ordering is a long-standing issue in not only generative syntax, but in the field of grammar at large. Okay? And in particular, in Larson's 2021 paper, he was not satisfied with a cartographic approach to this non-rigid ordering of attributive adjectives. Okay? And then instead, he proposed an alternative approach based on what he calls the pre-ordered feature set or process, which is just a set of adjectival class features that are ordered by something like subjectivity based on Strong Minimalist 2017 experimental work. So they found that subjectivity is what partially determines which order between these attributive adjectives. Okay? So Larson lets each modified noun their process of adjectival class features like color, material, size, etc. The order in which actually determines the order in which the adjectives merge with the noun. Okay? So the less subjective adjectives are closer to the noun. But the interesting thing here is that we will have more flexible or non-rigid ordering. And that is modeled in Larson's work by a bidirectional ordering relation between 2 or more of the class features. So this is how this free variation is derived or explained in Larson 2021. However, there are 2 potential problems in this theory. The first is that it explains non-rigidity for sure, but it doesn't really explain the gradient acceptability, which Larson himself also acknowledges. The second potential problem is that even though Larson is arguing against the cartographic approach, he still heavily relies on the many formalized or syntacticized semantic features, okay, just as in cartography. But now we have a form sequence. We can implement the same idea in a different way, where adjectival ordering is still determined by subjectivity. That one hasn't changed, but we don't want to hard code this in terms of syntactic features anymore. Okay, we leave to the excellent instead. So in syntax, we just take a bunch of adjectives, we form a set, and then we apply multidimensional parameters to that, which gives us the coset as output. And then at PF, we first feed that coset, that multidimensional object into form sequence, and then we pronounce or externalize that sequence. How is the sequence chosen? Well, here it's partially determined, it's semi-determinate, it's guided by subjectivity. Okay? So there's no formal features like color, material, or size. We don't need to postulate these in syntax anymore. The relevant notions are still relevant, but they remain conceptual, and they are accessible to epsilon in a computational context, properly in the discourse. And then gradient acceptability, on the other hand, may arise because there may still be other factors in addition to subjectivity that might influence the epsilon choice. Now, how much time do I still have? Okay, I can go through one more example. So this is the second example, which is the example of Chinese coordinate compounds. While Chinese really has a large number of such coordinate compounds, including from 2 roots to up to 7 roots. It's kind of crazy. And sometimes the interroot ordering is flexible. Right? And in my own earlier work from 2021, I proposed an earlier version of what I'm presenting here. So in that version, I proposed a form sequence-based approach to the linearization of Chinese coordinate compounds, where I used a root coordination before a categorization. So for a 3-root co-compound like tall, rich, handsome, or tall, handsome, rich, which is a perfect guy, we can just take these roots and pair merge them with a pivot in syntax, which gives us again routinely a multidimensional object, and then we turn that object into a sequence of PA, and then we externalize that or linearize that. So thank you. So what's the guiding principle? What is giving us? What is guiding us to make the choice here? Well, according to a previous work like Chen 2008, Xu 2016, and C 2021, prosody is the key factor here. So the level tone root gets linearized before the oblique tone morphemes or roots. So in Gao is a level tone morpheme, so it gets the first slot. But Fu and Shuai, they have the same tone, so they can be switched. So prosody or phonological factors are the guiding principle here. Okay? Okay? But of course, there are still other factors. Let me take one more minute, sorry, to quickly go through the third example. The third example is from the constant school scholars' formal semantic theory of definite noun phrases, where they also explicitly used the epsilon operator. And interestingly, they used this contextually indexed epsilon operator. So in 21a and b, we have two different types of epsilon term. We have a classical epsilon term in 21a, which simply picks out an arbitrary entity, such as an arbitrary apple. But in 21b, we have a contextually indexed epsilon operator, which actually picks out the most salient entity, here the most salient actor in a given context. What's interesting about this theory is that this context indexed epsilon operator actually does two jobs at once. Okay? So first, it ranks a set based on its members' salient levels in discourse, and second, it chooses the most salient element out of that set. I respectively call these two aspects choose a sequence and choose an element. While constant school scholars don't really specify how exactly the sequence ranking is formed, but since it's a sequence, we can use form sequence. But we should bear in mind that here everything happens just in a discourse. There's no narrow syntax involved at all, nor is there any conjunction. So here is a nice example of a totally third factor based and fully general case application scenario of form sequence. Again, together with form set, because form set is still a third factor tool as well. But here too, the epsilon choice is not really indeterminate. On the contrary, it's fully determined. Okay, it's fully determined because the sequence we're choosing is just a sequence that matches the contextually fixed salience ranking. Okay? So here's a quick summary. In the three examples we have seen, we can see that there's a range of choice influencing factors involved in the background. They're not accessible to the narrow syntax, but they're accessible in the broader computational context. And also, unlike in mathematics, there are actually very few, if any, truly indeterminate choices in linguistics or in cognitive sciences more generally, which I kind of want to take to be a very general difference across the two disciplines of mathematics on the one hand and cognitive sciences on the other hand. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you for your attention.
So we now have a 10-minute Q&A session, right? So. Just taking questions, comments. Please raise your hand or hold your mic right in front of you.
I enjoyed your talk very much, and my understanding may be wrong, but I think in your analysis of the coordinate structure, I think you tried to combine coordination and modification.
No, I didn't.
Last analysis of the okay, then it's about, I think that's about modification.
Yes, the whole thing is modified as an adjunct. The whole phrase is being used as an adjunct.
So that the reason here, order is important because this is a modification. Even though we have more than one adjectives, this is about not about coordination.
What do you mean?
Yeah, when we have a form sequence, then then adjective, then that is a coordination, not about modification. So that in the case of coordination, I think that there is no adjective order restriction.
There's no restriction between the conjuncts.
Yeah.
There's no constraint from the syntax, but based on, according to what Larson is arguing here, there's something that's non-syntactic that is influencing this order, like subjectivity. Yeah. So that's not a syntactic constraint, but some more conceptual constraint.
So then most of your talk is about coordination, right? But at this point, you introduce modification. That's why I'm somewhat confused.
That's a really good question, actually. So what I failed to mention, I apologize for that, is that what we're building here is a multi-dimensional coordinate structure, but that's just the coordinate structure itself. We can make use of the coordination in any way that we want to use it for in the larger tree. We can either merge that entire coordinate phrase as a complement or as an adjunct or as a specifier, wherever we want to put it.
So in other words, in Chomsky, at some point, Chomsky used the pair merge for coordination. Is valid approach or not? We need to verify. Okay, that is okay. Usually, we use the pair merge for modifiers, adjuncts, right? So that whether we can extend the operation to accommodate coordination. So that what do you think about that move is a correct move or?
That's such a great yet challenging question. So my honest answer here is that in order to further expand, I think this is also related to pictures like the morning. In order to further pursue this higher dimensional thinking, this higher dimensional view of pair merge, we somehow need to view both adjunction and pair merge in a more generalized way. We don't want to limit this just to the motivating, the classical example of modification. Sure, that's the motivating, that's the classical case of pair merge, but we want to further generalize this general approach, this general merge operation. If we want to really merge, it's all we have. I think that's a really wonderful question. Thanks.
Thank you. And other questions?
Just a clarification question. So in your narrow syntax to generate no, it's up, right?
It should be turned around like that.
Oh. It's okay. Yeah. So just to clarify, you have narrow syntax, first step to generate calling function, and you have an and you have a set of things.
Right.
So what you just said, so you do assume binary merge.
Sorry?
You have A, B, C all together.
Let me go back.
Form sequence.
Here.
So where's the binary? Yeah. Or you don't adopt that?
I do adopt binary syntax. So when we merge each and every one of these conjunct items with the code in its separate dimension, it's still binary, like S and co in dimension 1, S2 and co in dimension 2, S3 and co in dimension 3, like this. It's still binary.
So you assume between any two conjunct there's a syntactic position for a code element.
Yes, that's the idea. So because when we do this multidimensional pair merge, each and every conjunct is still linked to the conjunct. So the conjunct can, in theory, be pronounced anywhere or nowhere.
I see. But I would like to challenge that, because that semantically it can be challenged. If you have multiple conjuncts, only before the last one you have and. If each one is followed by a coordinator, actually the structure is ambiguous. It can be partially collective or distributive, but if you have a B, C, D, and E, it has to be either distributive or collective. There's no subpart grouping, so there's a difference. It is not true that all conjunct is followed by this coordinator.
Thank you. That's a really important point. I have to confess that I hadn't thought about that, so that's a really important point for me to bear in mind and keep thinking. My immediate thought is that you can probably explain that by language-specific constraints, like conditions on how and where conjunctions can be pronounced or interpreted. Like you said, like you very correctly pointed out, if we really can freely pronounce the conjunct anywhere as is predicted by this theory, then it's chaotic. There's ambiguity. But then, in order to remove that ambiguity, the language system, the faculty of language, must somehow give us further constraints. That constraint is not the built-in part of narrow syntax, but it has to be there to further constrain whatever narrow syntax can generate and filter that thing out. I think that's the direction. I don't know how promising this direction is, but that's the thing I can immediately think of. Thank you.
Oh, I think we seem to have another, probably last question from online, like 10,000 viewers.
Okay, so
Yeah, you can check.
Here?
Yeah.
Someone leaves it.
yeah, so I have one small question. How can you ensure the structural property among the elements in the sequence? For instance, you marry a dog, the boy loves the picture of herself, this notice the song for them. How can you ensure the structural property? What does this mean? What does the structural property mean? Yeah. Can anybody help me? So what is the question? Oh, binding. Yeah, that's a brilliant question. So thank you. Now I see the question. I now see what the question is. Thank you. Yes. So in this way to derive coordination structure with multidimensional pair merge, there's no C-command relation between the different conjuncts. However, something that I have to emphasize here, and thanks for giving me the chance to clarify this. It's something that I have already mentioned in one of my questions to Victor in the morning, actually. That is a conjunct, just like adjuncts, conjuncts are not all of the same type either. So we have to somehow make a distinction between the different types of correlation or conjunction. But I'm sure Nina has worked a lot on empirical cases. We cannot really lump every case of conjunction altogether in one big group. We have to somehow distinguish conjunction or correlation structures that can be derived in this way and those cases that cannot. In fact, that brings us back to Chomsky's original wording here. He only uses this form sequence rule to generate unstructured, unlimited, unbounded correlation. But apparently not all correlation structures are like that. Right? Okay, so that's my my answer to this. I hope that is satisfactory. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're kind of running out of time,
Oh,
so
sorry for taking up my
we better
time.
stop here.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.